So, hello and welcome to Grief Unedited. This is a space where we are going to have hopefully a real, honest, and raw conversation about grief and loss. I'm your host, Karen Lafferty. I'm an accredited counsellor specialising in grief and have worked with people for over a decade, helping them to navigate their journey through loss. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Continuum Counselling or on www.continuumcounselling.com. And just to bear in mind that this podcast is for educational purposes only. Any views that are expressed in this are my own and they're not representative of any third parties that I work with or on behalf of. And lastly, just a bit of a content warning that these conversations are real and unedited, as it says on the tin, so please use a bit of discretion when listening. If you're finding the content triggering in any way, because let's be honest, grief can be overwhelming at times, listen to your own wisdom, pull back if you need to, and remember that it will be here in the background when you choose to dip in again. So for today's episode, I've got the lovely Victoria Cunningham with me today from the Ordinary People Academy. And today's episode is called Grief Across Generations, Losing a Parent as an Adult. So if it's all right, Victoria, I'm going to hand over to you to let you tell us a wee bit about yourself and just introduce who you are.
Thank you very much, Karen. I am Victoria Cunningham, as you said. I am the founder and CEO of the Ordinary People Academy, where we train ordinary people to become extraordinary wellness professionals. So we do this through a variety of in-person and online courses. We've got yoga teacher training, Pilates teacher training, and our recent one is breathwork facilitator training. We've also got a lovely course that we do, movement and mindfulness for children aged 3 to 13. So we train facilitators for that as well. So it's a nice range of courses. And one of the things that I love is that I get to really have variety in my work because I get to do in-person training both here in Scotland, also in Northern Ireland, if you can hear from the accent, that is originally my home. So it's nice to be able to go back to Northern Ireland and do training. But I also do online training, and some of this is one-to-one and some of it is group training. And it means that I get to work with people at a time that suits them and where it is sort of most comfortable for their nervous system, because it's happening at home, no matter where that home is. So we had someone last year on the breathwork facilitator training from Australia, and she could not attend any of the group courses just because of the timings, but we did one-to-one work together so that she could get, like her practice and everything done with me at a time that really suited her. And I think that's my furthest, the other side of the world is my furthest client, but it's mostly here in the UK.
That is incredibly, that's a good stretch into the other side of the world. Yeah.
It certainly is. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. I love the flexibility of it as well. Do you know, I think that's the thing that really comes through as you're describing it, is just the different access points for people to, make the most of it in a way that's going to work for them.
I think the irony, or maybe you chose that word deliberately, the flexibility is, because it's such a yoga and Pilates are all about being flexible. But I have done this full time since 2006. So I started out originally with the kids stuff and ran a Stretch and Play as a children's charity in Northern Ireland. And it was, it should have been a really flexible career, but actually I put a lot of rigid things in place, and it made it quite difficult. And in 2009, I actually had a bit of a breakdown. I think what happened was the only person who saw the business as a charity was me, and as a result, I wasn't taking any payment from it. So I was having to do a lot of other like yoga teaching and Pilates teaching in the evenings, and then I also got a full-time job in the middle of it, and I was working like 80 hours a week. It was ridiculous, and worked myself into burnout and a subsequent diagnosis of bipolar disorder. So it took a while to sort of recover from that. What I realized was I'll be in recovery for the rest of my life, really. But I still wanted to do this, and I just have, I think it's like yoga was my first love. And I think it's really interesting that a girl from a small town in rural Northern Ireland that didn't know anything, I grew up in the Troubles and I didn't know anything other than Catholic and Protestant and all of this, that I would discover and fall in love with yoga, which came from India and Hinduism and all of this sort of different stuff. And I found that yoga was, I think, really beneficial for me. As I said, I now have this diagnosis of bipolar disorder, and so I spend a lot of time in my head, and I think the yoga was the first thing that got me into my body. The Pilates continued that body journey, and Pilates, as I've gotten older, has really become my main practice. I think when I was younger, I was more flexible, so the yoga really suited me. As I got older and I'm like post C-section, the Pilates is the one that supports me more. But the breath work has been the one that I think for the last couple of years has been really, really good about getting me out of my head and more into my body. And the breath has been the thing that does that. So it's definitely been, there is flexibility in what I've done, but it's a deliberate choice to be as flexible as possible, and to share that with others, that you don't have to have that rigid thing. You don't have to learn to be a teacher in a certain way just because that's the way it's always been done. And you don't have to look a certain way to become a teacher, particularly the Pilates. I'll get people going, well, I can't do the advanced moves. I'm like, that doesn't make you a good teacher. If you can do the advanced moves, it makes you a good gymnast. It doesn't necessarily make you a good actual teacher. Whereas if you are struggling with certain moves, that's what makes you more patient and understanding of your own clients' needs. And so I really have a big thing about getting more diverse voices into the wellness field, and not about it being about aesthetics, but actually being about, everything has got more depth to it. So even the kids stuff, yes, it's fun, but actually it came about because there was a great need for esteem building, and particularly in a post-Troubles Northern Ireland. And I was working in areas of multiple deprivation, and I was working with kids that had come, had a lot of adverse childhood experiences. So there is purpose behind everything that I do. I'm not just doing it. So yes, we're doing breath work, but we're not just doing breath work. We are actually learning about the nervous system and how it works, and how we are really quite dysregulated, and how to move out of that dysregulation through polyvagal theory. So there's a lot of stuff about holding space for people, and I think trauma-informed practice is where it's at these days.
I'm smiling because there's so many words that you've just said there that just make the light bulbs in my brain cells tick off, because I think that whole premise of working in a trauma-informed way is such an important consideration in this day and age. But let's dive in and give us the context of your grief, because I'm really excited to talk with you a wee bit about how breathwork has supported you in your journey of loss. But maybe start by telling us a bit about who we're remembering today. So what is your relationship to grief that we're going to be talking a wee bit about today?
We're going to be talking about my parents. So my mother passed away in May of this year, 2024, just 5 days before her 79th birthday. So it was sudden and unexpected. She had a massive heart attack. However, when we look back at it, it wasn't entirely unexpected. She had been in heart failure for a couple of years. She had rheumatoid arthritis and a number of different conditions. She'd survived cancer twice.
Wow.
So she, and her body was failing her, but her mind was as bright as could be. We're also remembering my father. He passed away in August 2022 after a 4-year battle with Parkinson's disease. What I find really difficult about my dad's death is that we didn't know he had Parkinson's until after he'd passed away, and it was on the death notification.
Wow.
Now when I look at it, it's obvious that he had Parkinson's, but I was looking for the traditional telltale sign of like shakiness or tremors, and he didn't have that. but he had so many of the other symptoms, but no one had ever explained to us. My dad had a fall 4 years before he died, and we don't know whether it was actually the start of Parkinson's that had caused the fall, or whether it was the fall that caused his sort of down, I don't want to say downfall, but his health, his interest in life. Yeah. I feel like my father died twice. He died in 2018 when he fell and he was unable to work. He used to be an avid reader. He wouldn't even pick up a newspaper after that. He, he just sat for 4 years in the living room, and my mum ran about after him and then ran herself into heart failure. She was sort of hours from a stroke and ended up in hospital in early 2022. And I was very concerned that she would die first. Mm-hmm. And what would we do with my dad? Because my sister and we don't live in Northern Ireland. So there was no one local to support them or care for them. And my dad would absolutely have had to go into a home. Mm. And I think I just don't know how he would have coped with that. I don't know how we would have coped with that. So there was a lot of fear. But there was also a huge amount of fear about losing my mum, because she was my best friend. So my mum, I know lots of people say that, people have different relationships with their parents. My dad and I had a good relationship as adults. We didn't when I was a teenager. We argued a lot because we were very, very similar. We're both quite strong-headed and principled and all of these things. So we would have argued a lot when I was a kid. But as an adult, we were better. But then when he got sick, it felt like the tables had turned and we'd started arguing again. But he was the teenager this time and I was the adult, saying, why can't you do this? Why can't you do that? And he physically couldn't do the things, but he also verbally couldn't tell us why he couldn't do the things. And I kept thinking, has he had a stroke? Has, his just inability to communicate with us is not good. And then he just relied on my mum so much. But we all did. I had one sister and she had a very close relationship with my mum. My sister and I were not close because we didn't need to be. I knew everything that was going on with my sister because my mum told me. It was, exactly the same for her. So my sister and I rarely spoke, but we knew everything that was going on with each other. But my mum, I spoke to her every single day. Wow. So at least once a day. And the day that she died that night, I spoke to her 3 times that day. So, it's, I don't have any regrets about the relationship that we had. She knows that I loved her. I know that she loved me. And it's the same with my dad. Even though we argued, he knew there was love there. And that was important, I think, for both of us. And it was strange. Losing my dad it felt like a relief in some ways because he struggled and because my mum was struggling so much. But losing my mum meant that I lost all of my contact with home. It's not home anymore. It's Ireland now, it's not my home. Having to clear out the family home, which we'd lived there for over 40 years. Wow. Was huge. All of those things. And it's that when you lose one parent, you've still got a parent, but I've lost both parents now, and it's it doesn't matter how old you are. I feel like an orphan. Yeah. Which makes me feel like little orphan Annie, and that I'm a child. But I also remember my grandmother passing away, and she was almost 99 when she died. And my mum was in her late 60s, and she said, I feel like an orphan. I've lost. And I'm going, you're almost 70. How can you be an orphan? But now I get it.
You get it now.
I understand. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's something in that as well, isn't there, about just your own, like your sense of self, your identity, that suddenly feels like it shifts in that moment of like, well, this is who I was prior to these losses, and then we've got life after them, and yeah, who am I now?
And I had such a codependent relationship with my mum, actually. I would describe it
Yeah.
like that. Um, we I did mention, I think, earlier in the conversation that she survived cancer
Yeah.
twice.
Yeah.
Um, so the I think the codependency started in childhood, but I know when she developed breast cancer, she was in her late 50s, and I was living in Canada at the time, and I was doing my yoga teacher training, believe it or not, and I'd phoned, and I was like whittling on about something, completely unimportant, and she said, I found a lump in my breast, and I quit. I moved, I went straight home, and that was it. I've not been back to Canada since, which is really disappointing. But it just hasn't come up. But I knew that I had to look after her. I knew that my dad would be at work. My sister at the time was working as an air hostess, so she was traveling all over the world, and and I was living in Canada basically on an expired student visa, doing my yoga teacher training and just faffing about. So I thought, no, I need to go home. And partly when she got the diagnosis, I took it upon myself that it was my fault. That if I had been in the room with her when she went for the mammogram, that she would have had a different result, which I know is not true, but this is perhaps part of my mental health and my own conditioning. But I believed that it was my fault that she'd gotten sick. And it didn't get any better. Like she'd gone for she'd had a mastectomy, and they'd said all the margins were clear, everything was fine. And I didn't go into the appointment, and she came out of an appointment and she was in tears. No, they found cancer in my lymph nodes. So now I'm going to have to get, and I was like, if I'd gone in, they wouldn't have found cancer, which I know is not, realistically, I know this is not true, but these were the bargains that I was making. And my mum swears that she would not have survived without me. But after that, I went to every single appointment, every single chemotherapy treatment, every single radiotherapy treatment. I was there. And then, but she was there for me. You know, when I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, it was my mum I called, not my husband. I went to her first and foremost. And then she was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and had to get chemotherapy again. But that was, I think, 17 years later, and a very different, a different cancer, but also a very different experience.
Can imagine.
Yeah, there was a lot more informed consent that there really hadn't been in the early noughties. Like we just went along with whatever we were told, and this time, you know, she was definitely much more informed along the way. But again, I went to every chemotherapy treatment. By this stage, I had moved, and I'd been living in Scotland for 5 years. And but I just travelled home every 3 weeks. It was also difficult because at that point, my husband and I were going through a divorce. Now we had no kids, but we had a couple of dogs. So I was having to travel on the ferry because I had to bring the dogs with me.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. So it was quite a fraught and stressful experience.
Yeah, I'm just getting a picture of just how busy life must have been at that time, you know, going back and forth, because that's not just a quick journey either.
No, you can see why I need work to be flexible.
Yeah.
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 But and this is part of the reason why I think I did so much work in Northern Ireland. One, because I'm from there, but two, it meant that I could go home and keep my eye on both of them.
Yeah.
But then so she survived the breast cancer and was cancer free, as I say, for 17 years until she had the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma diagnosis. She went through chemo and everything for that for 6 months, and again then was diagnosed cancer free. But just before she died, as well as having rheumatoid arthritis, which she struggled with for a decade, and also heart failure and various heart conditions. They were doing tests for cancers. And one of the things that they had said was that her body had become incredibly frail, and it was unlikely, if there was cancer, that there could be any chemotherapy, because her body wouldn't really be able to take the treatment. So when she passed away suddenly, it was really difficult because it was unexpected, but it was really the best thing, because I don't think I could have watched her a third time go through that cancer treatment and watch her die in front of me.
Sometimes we'll talk about how like two things that seem to be opposing can exist at the same time, and it strikes me that's one of those moments of like absolute heartbreak, but also the recognition that it was probably the best option in terms of the kindest death that she could have had, because there wasn't, as you say, weeks or months or years of suffering either.
There were a number of things, because my mum, like my dad, gave up on life. That was how it felt. And the man that died was not my father.
Yeah.
And what we had with my mum for the first year, I think it was just relief and like exhaustion and getting over it. But then she really started to remember the man that he had been. And that's who she was mourning. And she was very, very lonely at the end. And one of her greatest fears was dying at home alone with, you know, oh, what if you girls find me? And I have an aunt who is 5 years older than my mum. She's still going strong. I don't think she'll ever go. She's one of these ones that she's going to go till she's 105. But my mum was concerned that my aunt would find her. You know, those were real fears. And again, that we can take some relief that she was actually in hospital getting these tests, these biopsies and these cancer tests, and they had her in a ward that they weren't concerned about her, but that's where she had the massive heart attack. And for us, there is some relief in knowing that she wasn't on her own, that she was with the best people as well. Like, they were able to try, and I think they did resuscitate her, but then she went again, and then they had to let her go. So she wasn't on her own, and she was with the people that, if she could have been saved, would have saved her. So
I sometimes wonder if there's like a kind of strength of character thing in how people died, you know, almost that, you know, it feels like if your mum could have chosen when was the time to go, it's like that was her, not ideal maybe, but, you know, it wasn't you that was walking in and finding her, it wasn't her sister, you know, she was in a space that she was well cared for, and
and she was really happy.
How much that plays out.
Yeah, like she was laughing and joking. Like they were talking about releasing her the next day, and that she was like, I need to get home. I have 79 candles to blow out on my birthday cake next week. And so she was sort of laughing and joking about that. She was asking me, have you sent a card? You know, all these things. And she had no intention of dying, but I think she might well have chosen it. And what I find, and this might be really, I don't know, hippy dippy, but on the night that she died, I had gone to bed, probably about 11, and had fallen sound asleep. But I woke up shortly after 1, and I could not get a breath. I was choking. I was like, I'm dying. I've never experienced anything like it before. I sat up and I was like, and I could not get this breath. And then about an hour later, the phone call came through to say that she'd passed away. And for me, I wasn't shocked or surprised. I feel like I know that it was her that when I felt her leave. And I think that is true because we were so interconnected. Even though I physically wasn't with her, emotionally, energetically, I was connected to her. And there's no way that my mum could have left with a whisper.
Yeah. Wow.
So I don't think there's ever a good age to lose a parent. I, as I mentioned before, I grew up in the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and I have an uncle who was killed. He was a police officer, and he was shot dead by the IRA. So my cousins lost their dad when they were 11, 12 and 17. And so they were children. They never really knew their dad either. The 17-year-old perhaps knew him better, but the two younger ones didn't. They just had this thing. And I think for the cousin that was the youngest, her entire life has been flavoured by this. She's been a victim her entire life, and she's never ever gotten over that. This has been so traumatic that it has flavoured everything in her life ever since. And she just lives in grief, and she's never had an opportunity to experience life without grief, because she's not, because she was so young. So when my uncle passed away, it was 3 weeks before my 8th birthday. So that was a huge trauma thing for me as well. But all I could remember, or all I could think was, my grandmother lost her son. My mum lost her big brother. My cousins lost their daddy. All I lost was an uncle, and I wasn't that close to him. I was only 7. But also, and this is quite selfish of me, I didn't just lose my uncle, I lost my childhood. And I didn't have a birthday then until I was 11. So we didn't celebrate my birthday, because then the next year, it's been a year since your uncle died. It's been 2 years since your uncle died. And, and it was a huge thing. And I don't want to belittle anybody's grief or trauma. I think Northern Ireland, it's very difficult to find people who lived through that and didn't have someone either side of the divide that was touched in some way by the Troubles. I mean, I was reading recently, like 3,500 people were killed, not to mention the people who were injured and maimed, and the families of those 3,500 people have all been hurt in some ways. So I think grief, I've experienced it from a very, very young age. And in many ways, I think that's also where the codependency with my mum came, because that was the first time I ever saw her cry.
Ah, okay. Wow. Gosh. Okay.
So, and I think I was like, I have to be the perfect daughter to make her happy and to keep her here. And there was definitely a sensitivity and an awareness that life was fragile and that people could go. And that's why when she got cancer the first time, it was like, this isn't something that we can just deal with. This could be my mum leaving me.
Yeah.
So it's the worst thing that could happen, is that I would lose my mum. And what's really interesting is that I have been doing a lot of work on myself and a lot of counselling and things like that. And one of the things that I was trying to do was maybe lose some of that codependency. I have my own son now, and I was like, it is not right that the most important person in my life is my mum.
Okay.
Actually, the most important person in my life should be me, and then my son. But it wasn't. It was my mum.
Your mum was one and foremost. Yeah.
And so I was starting to wonder, like, how do I, not be so involved in her life? And but as she was getting sicker, and she was going to need me more. So there's a huge hole in my life at the moment. I mean, certainly in terms of time, because like we were on the phone every day, and sometimes those phone conversations would last an hour. I never wrote an email that I didn't pass by her, you know, this sort of thing. She was really involved in my business and supported me. She was, you know, she came to my teacher training, assessments and everything like that. She's been there right from the start. So to not have her here means that I need to make the decisions. I don't have that sounding board.
Yeah.
And I have to be the grown-up. And part of that is the grieving thing. I also don't have time to wallow. And I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I would feel that if I were sitting just that I couldn't operate or I couldn't do anything, I can't do that. I have a 3-year-old who goes, "Mummy, why are you sad?"
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've had to keep going for him and keep going because I'm self-employed. So I've got to keep going with my business. I took a month off when it first happened, and in Northern Ireland, the funeral is really quick. The person dies and you usually bury them about 2 or 3 days later. It's really quick. So you don't have time to think about things. You're in the ritual of it. And then you have time to sort of sit and think about it. And I think I was rushing along and doing all of that. And then my sister and I, we had the job of clearing out the family home. And we'd lived there for over 40 years. So there are a lot of memories. There was a lot of rubbish. And I had said this, my sister's like, no, because my mum was very tidy, but she was also a hoarder. We found cards. She never threw out a card.
Right.
Christmas cards, birthday cards, Mother's Day cards, Father's Day cards. We found cards from when my uncle had passed away, like sympathy cards. And I'm going, you know, he passed away 40 years ago. It's unbelievable that she's held on to all of this, but she held on to everything. She didn't throw anything out. She just was very neat at filing things away. And so it was a massive job to clear out the house. And it's hard because it's not just saying goodbye to your parents, it's saying goodbye to your childhood.
Yeah. That space that holds so many memories.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, it's saying goodbye to the connections that I had. I feel like going home is strange because it's not home anymore. And to be honest, it shouldn't have been home, because home should be where my family is, which is my son, my partner, and me.
Often though, it's that sense of like holding on and letting go at the same time, and I find I talk about that often in sessions with clients, where there's a part of us that, you know, needs to hold on to the memories and the experiences we've had with the person who's died, but then there's the letting go also of like, yeah, there's bits of stuff that we can't take forward with us for, you know, lots of different reasons. So it's those two truths at the same time of like, yeah, there's bits of this and bits of that experience that I want to hold because they're meaningful, but also the stuff that just has to be said goodbye to, I suppose, as part of that lost journey.
Yep. And I think it's been a difficult 7 months. It's only been 7 months as well. So it really hit me at sort of 5 months that and I'm sure you've said this and you will be saying this lots, that grief is not linear. It doesn't happen to a time scale. But I still had that expectation that I should be feeling better by now, but instead I was feeling worse. I think without having the rituals to do, the you know, informing everybody, and it just you know, going with all the sort of organization of the funeral, and then organization of their affairs, and then clearing out the house. All of those things gave us purpose, and now it's done. It's like
Yeah, the adrenaline stops, doesn't it? It's like you're running on kind of autopilot in those early days and weeks, and then that point comes where the adrenaline stops, runs out. I don't know biologically what happens there, but you're not in that same space, and your nervous system's got to adjust to, well, what is this now? Do you know, how do I navigate the rest of my life without that person in it?
Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
she comes to me every night.
Does she?
She does. She
Yeah.
comes to me every night. So last night I was having dreams about her doing crosswords.
Wow.
So she used to do the crossword every single day in the newspaper. You had to buy her a newspaper come hell or high water, and she did her crossword. In fact, one of the phone calls that we'd had on her last day was she was asking who the first minister of Scotland was, the first minister. And I'm like, okay, Donald Dewar, why? And she says, crossword. And that was it. That was the end of the conversation.
Mm.
I was like, right, bye then.
Mhm.
So I think all those little things, and I find it interesting because my toddler will sometimes, he's going through this phase now. What's your name, mummy? What's daddy's name? And then every time he's like, what's granny's name?
Mm. Mhm.
And that's hard
Mm.
because he knows her as a thing, but he's never going to know her as a person, and
Yeah.
that is really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose it's, for me, there's a real sadness there in the closeness that you've had with your mum over those years, and knowing that he won't
He won't have
experiencing
that.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
One of the things that happened just last week was my partner had a car accident. Now
Oh,
it was okay. It was a bit of a shock, but he was pulling out from between two parked cars just in front of the flat. We park on the road, and there was a council van that was in his blind spot. He didn't see them, and they crashed
ah,
into him.
mm,
So the bumper was ripped off and all of that. He's fine. Everything's fine. But all I could think was, I wish my mum and dad were here. My dad was actually a mechanic. So he would have been in there. He would
yep.
have been doing everything. He would have been clearing the debris, directing the traffic, getting everything organised. My mum would have been on the phone to the insurance company. She would have been running my partner to the hospital. She would have been making cups of tea and keeping an
Mm,
eye on everybody. They would have been so involved in that. And then I was sad. I was sad that they weren't there. And then I started to think about it, and I was like, but they were there because they were in me. And I
yeah,
did all of those
you
things.
does it. Yep.
And I just went into like operation mode, like, right, let's just go, 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 go. We'll do this, we'll do that. I'll phone this one and
Mm,
organize that. My partner was just like, God love him. But it was it was an interesting realization. And then my sister had phoned, and she was like, I'm really missing mummy. And um, it's a Northern Irish thing. We call her mummy's mummy. We
mommy.
call her daddy's
Yeah.
daddy. And I never called my dad daddy. Once I became a teenager, um, we because we argued a lot when I was a teenager, I called him Andy because that was his name. That was what the guys called him in the golf club. That was what people called him in his work. And I would go, Andy. And then he would, because you'd go, Daddy, 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 and he wouldn't
No
respond.
answer.
But if you shouted Andy, he responded to you. So I called my parents by their names.
The
So
names.
yeah, yeah. So my mum was Gwen, and my dad was Andy, and it was, yeah. I find it interesting. My sister still calls them mummy and daddy, um,
Yeah.
but I still call them Gwen and Andy, and they are one of the things. One of the memories that I have as well is that I told you my mum came to all my classes, and it was in a yoga class, and this woman, then I said something about Gwen, and then I went, oh, obviously she's my mum. And this woman came up to her at the end of class and went, now I get it. She says, I could not understand why you kept coming back because Victoria was so rude to you. Because I'd be like,
Wow.
Gwen, you're not doing it right. Gwen, you've got your leg in the wrong position. Gwen, you're turned the wrong way. And I would be shouting at my mum. And so it was funny that that this girl thought
You were just
If I
being
were that wee
rude.
woman, I wouldn't be going. But yeah, turned out it was actually, it's your mum. That's why you talk to her like that.
Mm.
So yeah, I find um, I'm still talking to her
Mm.
because it's quiet without her.
Yeah,
Um,
can imagine.
and I don't think that'll ever end. And I don't think there's ever a right time for a parent to die.
Mm.
Um, that it hurts no matter what.
Yeah.
Um, no matter what your relationship is as well. You know, I have a number of friends who have very toxic relationships with their mothers and difficult relationships where I think the only thing they'd feel when their parent dies is relief, but a mixture of guilt and relief.
Mm.
And I didn't have that. I had such a good relationship with her that yeah, it was just it's just been what do I do now?
Yeah. I always
Who am I
think
now?
it's like when you're navigating those early days of grief as well, like you're so right that the relationship's the thing that we're grieving, and it doesn't make it easier or harder, it just makes it different when there's added complexities in that dynamic as well, do you know? Because I think for some people there is that real like heartache when it's somebody that you're so close to, but then you've got other people who grieve the loss of, what could have been their relationship with their parents. So yeah, I always say to people, it's no better or worse. Sometimes we do that comparison of, oh, they've got it worse than I have, or,
Yeah.
I'm lucky that this was my experience. And it's like, it's not better or worse. It's just fundamentally a different experience because you're you and they're them. And that's the thing that we're grieving the loss of, is that relationship between me and whoever they were to me.
And I think what's interesting as well is, you know, my sister's relationship with my mum was very different from mine, but they were also close, just um not in not in the same way. She didn't
Right.
do those things, but she did all the other stuff, you know. And for her, there's been also because she was the youngest child, I think there's a bit of that. But for her there has been some regression that
Mm.
she feels like a child.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I don't think I've had that luxury to feel like a child because I've always been the oldest one. I've always had to be the responsible one. And now I have a child of my own
Yeah.
that I need to be the adult
Yeah.
for.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's an interesting difference the way the two of us can be. You know, she
And
can.
sometimes though that protective factor is having kids, do you know, because I know for some people it's like, gosh, not only do I need to navigate my own grief, but I need to do it whilst parenting this tiny person at the same time. But I think as you said earlier on, do you know, it's like you have to get up, you have to show up when you've got kids, and sometimes it's the thing that helps keep us moving in our grief because they don't stop. Do you know, they still need the things they need, and we've still got to show up for them. So yeah, I sometimes wonder if having kids is a bit of a protective factor for not going so much into that kind of well of grief
Of
that,
sadness. Yeah.
yeah, some people can really fall into. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the things that is really positive that has come out of this is that I have a much closer relationship with my sister now.
Ah, lovely.
So, as I said, we barely spoke. A
Mm-hmm.
couple of times a year would have been it. Um, and now we try to speak every day. Um,
Amazing.
so at least, you know, thank goodness for technology because it might just be a voice note on WhatsApp or
Mm.
something like that. But I feel like she is going to have a relationship with her nephew that she wouldn't have had otherwise. Um,
Ah, of course.
so yeah, and
Mm.
she looks at him and she finds him very difficult to look at because he looks like my dad.
What does he?
So he
Oh,
does things that are just my dad, and so she finds it really difficult because she just it hits her again and again that he's gone,
mm.
and you know, but I don't see it as much. He also looks like my partner, so I tend to focus on that. But there are just certain things that he does, and I'm like, God, he's only 3, and he's already acting like a 7-year-old man here. But you know, there are just things that he does that are very much my dad,
Mm.
and
Talk
little
to us a bit about your
expressions.
breathwork journey as well, because I really want to hear a wee bit about how that supported you in your grief as well. So yeah, tell people a wee bit about what breathwork is first and foremost.
So, oh God, right. We all breathe, obviously. We've been doing it since we were born. We'll do it right up until we die. But for the majority of our lives and the majority of our time, we don't breathe consciously. So breath work is, as the name suggests, you're actually working with your breath in order to really regulate your nervous system effectively. The breath is that connection between the brain and the body. For me, it's also the connection. It brings you into the present moment. It's very, very of this time. For me, my philosophy about things is that the brain is the future. It's always, like, a lot of the times it's future projection, worrying, thinking, planning, dreaming. It's all the future happens in the brain. The body has the past. It holds on to the past. Everything that has ever happened to you is held in your body's tissues. And I'm very fond of the book The Body Keeps the Score, which is by Bessel van der Kolk, and it's all about how trauma impacts the body's tissues and can cause injury and inflammation and then illness. A lot of our autoimmune conditions are actually caused through inflammation, which are caused through not necessarily paying enough attention to the body, ignoring the body, being in the brain, and just letting your body go until it's screaming at you. So I think a lot of us don't pay any attention to our bodies until they're shouting for help. So the breath is the bridge between the past and the future, between the brain and the body. The breath it occupies the present moment. It brings you into present moment awareness. You were talking to me before our call about your mindfulness practice. Yeah. And I think breathwork is a mindfulness practice. I have done mindfulness-based stress reduction and did it probably about 15 years ago and found it very helpful. Found it very difficult, though, to sit for long periods in meditation. And I think part of that is the way my brain's wired. I just find it hard to not focus on something. The brain's always going. But what the breath has done is given me an anchor point to be much more in the present moment without following off on my thoughts, which are going here, there, and everywhere. I actually did breathwork training back in 2012 and was very much, I find it interesting because I've done yoga since I was 13 years old, but I didn't breathe properly for years.
Yep.
And a lot of people, and I see it in class regularly, particularly in Pilates. I think there's something about the perfectionism of Pilates. People hold their breath while they're executing the movements instead of actually breathing through them. And it was the same thing for me. In yoga, I was holding my breath, doing the move, and then breathing. Or I was doing a specific breathing technique because it was something that we had to do. But in 2012, I came back and it was like, actually, everything should be breath initiated. We start with the breath, we move because the breath inspires us literally to move. And then, as so many things, I forgot and I got caught up in life. And then, there was a little thing called a global pandemic. And I think what's really interesting is that was a respiratory illness that was causing people to hold their breath. And I know for me, at the very start of the pandemic, I had a panic attack in Tesco. Do you remember when the start of the pandemic, we were having to queue up and they had the red light system and all of that. And they also had arrows down the aisles that you were supposed to follow in the right direction. And I was walking along and a couple were coming in the opposite direction, the wrong way. And I took a panic attack about them going the wrong way. I had to go into the car. My partner's Scottish, so he didn't get it. But basically it brought back this memory from Northern Ireland that if you went the wrong way down the road, you could have been killed. That was how
So memory.
That was the only way I could explain it. If you were like, people knew what religion you were in my town, depending on which side of the road you walked on.
Okay.
We had a northern, we had Protestant butchers, Catholic butchers, Protestant bakers, Catholic bakers. You didn't cross the line. It was a very sectarian, divided community, and you didn't cross the lines. And so to be in this pandemic and someone was crossing the line brought back that memory and really put me into that sort of trauma state. So I started to do a lot of reading about trauma, which I'd already been doing, some trauma-informed yoga practice, but that's when the breath work really started to come back into the fore for me. And I realized how the breath can really bring your nervous system into a state of regulation. And for many of us, the pandemic we have no idea about the impact that is going to have on our mental and physical health in years to come. Yeah. And it was a really traumatizing event. We've never had anything like that in our lifetime. Hopefully we never will again. But it was a really difficult time. And I realized that, again, I was holding my breath a lot. And I was like, no, I need to change this. And so I started to practice breath work, and I developed this breathwork facilitator training course that initially was 6 weeks long. Straight away, I knew that wasn't long enough. We doubled it, 12 weeks. That wasn't long enough either. So then we were doing 3 months with a month off to practice. The latest round is now 6 months long.
Right, okay.
Because I've realized that even though breathing is something that we do naturally, we actually, to be a breathwork facilitator, you're not a teacher, you're not telling somebody something they don't know, but you're facilitating their experience. So there needs to be a lot of practice yourself and a lot of embodiment of that. So now it's a 6 month long course, not that the content is doubled or anything like that, but more that you get much more time to practice with each other. And it was one of the things that I did when Mum passed away. I think it was 2 days after her funeral that I started a breathwork practice for myself that I haven't really shared it with my audience or anything like that, but I did it for 40 days. It's a big thing in the yoga tradition that you do like a 40-day sadhana or spiritual practice. And I did this for 40 days and 40 nights. And it was 40 nights because I did it just before bed. I did this.
Was that a conscious thing for you though, Victoria? Like, did it feel like did you have an innate kind of pull towards it, or did you consciously think, I'm going to put my energy
I knew I needed the support, and I committed to doing 40 days. A lot of the times I will start a 40-day practice, and then after day 3, it's gone, it's fallen by the wayside. But I was like, I need a minimum of 40 days to help me through this. And like, God love my partner, because it was a particular breathing technique that was quite noisy. It was through the mouth, and there was a lot of crying as well. And it was my time. I put the baby to bed, and then I went to bed, and I did this practice for about 20 minutes every night. So I committed to doing the 40 days, and I stuck to it for about 44 days, and then I was like, I'm done. I don't need it anymore. That said, I do go back to it sometimes. Because
what does it bring to you? Can you? I don't know if that's even a thing you can verbalize, but what did it do for you?
It's a particular breathwork technique that I was doing called 0 point breathing. So I'm taking all my pain, my grief, the circumstances around how my mum died, and I'm bringing them down to 0. Okay. So all the emotion, all of the feelings, I'm bringing everything down to 0. So I would repeat this, like my mum having a heart attack, my mum having to get resuscitated, my mum not surviving. bring it back to zero. And so I'd be wailing about it. But by the time the practice, the 20 minutes was done, I was much calmer. And it just seemed to help me every day. So it just let it feel more manageable. It gave everything like banks or structure around it. I feel like without it, my grief just would have crept out into everything, and I wouldn't have been a good parent, and I wouldn't have been a good teacher. I couldn't compartmentalize it, but this gave me an opportunity to just be with the sadness, and so I just find it really, really beneficial. But when its time was done, it was done, which was interesting.
I always think there's something so important about that wisdom in ourselves, though, isn't there? Of like, you knew you needed it in the first instance, and you found the right thing for you, but you also knew when you got what you needed out of it, and yeah, it wasn't serving that same purpose in the same way anymore.
Yeah, but I think there's also something about, people have been suggesting I journal. For me, journaling's too much in my head again. Oh, yes, in a little bit you're getting the words out. You don't have to reread them or anything like that. And it is a little bit in the body as well, but it wasn't a good practice for me. I was just ruminating. And there's something, as I said, that the breath work is just in the present. So I got to think about things that were in the past and bring them into this 0 point, and it just a point of light. So it wasn't nothing, it was this point of light, and it was like I was zooming out. So I think it really helped that way. And everything came up, things about my dad, things about my uncle, all of the deaths that I've experienced came through that practice, and I breathed and I breathed and I breathed. And yeah, I just keep breathing.
Yeah. Wow. Gosh, I feel like I could talk to you about this all day, because there's something so powerful about the breath that I can almost imagine if somebody said to you, like, how did you navigate your grief, and you say something along the lines of, well, I breathed my way through it. It's like folk are like, right, okay, whatever. But it's just so powerful when your intention is so clear on the purpose of it, the value of it, and you feel that sense of relief in your body as well. So yeah, that's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your reflections in this as well, because I think it's my hope always in this podcast is to help people to have a bit of a space to hear the reality of how folk have navigated grief and what's really helped. And I would hope that your experience will then help somebody else to maybe be curious about breathwork, maybe be curious about whether that might be the right fit for them. If people do want to contact you after this, Victoria, where do they find you?
They can find me at ordinarypeopleacademy.com, and they can find me on all the socials at Ordinary People Academy.
Amazing. Thank you. We will link this in the show notes as well. And just to finish up, just to say, I suppose if people have found this episode helpful, or if they think it might be useful to somebody that they know, then please consider sharing it and help us to spread the word, and also to subscribe, because that way you'll get notifications with each new episode as they're released. Thank you, Victoria, from the bottom of my heart, for being here and for being as honest, and thank you for sharing your mum Gwen and your dad Andy with us as well. It's been lovely to get to know a wee bit of them as well, so thank you so much.
Well, thank you for doing this podcast. I think it's really important that people can normalise grief and talk about it and not be scared of death, because death is part of life, and it's important that we get to honour our loved ones. I think we wouldn't be so sad if we didn't love them so much. So I think it's a really important subject, and I'm so glad that you're doing it, and I'm so glad I could be a small part of it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And yeah, until next time.